I didn't even make it to my seat before he started. "Oh, great!" he muttered, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "They're letting babies on planes now like it's a daycare." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. You learn to recognize a certain tone, the entitled blend of annoyance and superiority that usually follows a Patagonia vest and an expensive watch. My son's bottom lip quivered. He was only 8 months old, but he could sense tension like a tuning fork. "Shh, you're okay," I whispered, pressing him closer to my chest. I kept moving down the narrow aisle, brushing past knees and elbows, scanning seat numbers while trying not to elbow my fellow passengers in the face with my diaper bag. We were in 26B and C middle and aisle. He was in 3A. First class, window seat, of course. I caught a flash of him as we passed. Slicked back hair, a tailored suit, and that permanent Bluetooth earpiece that says, I have no idea how to live without being the center of attention. He actually fake coughed when we walked by, like the mere existence of a child might infect his pristine little business cocoon. My seatmate, a young woman with headphones and a blanket already draped over her knees, offered a sympathetic smile. I gave her a nod, grateful. We mothers learn to read faces fast. Allies, enemies, neutral bystanders. He was no bystander. "Why don't they have separate flights for this?" he stage whispered to the flight attendant. She gave him the kind of tight smile that only people in customer service truly master. "We're fully booked, sir," she said, "and babies are permitted in all cabins." "Babies, maybe," he said, chuckling at his own joke. "But screaming little banshees? That should be a crime." The moment the engines hummed and the plane began taxiing, my son started to fuss. It wasn't a full cry, yet, but it was headed there. And if you've ever flown with a baby, you know what that spiral feels like. I pulled out a bottle and rocked him gently. Breathe. Just breathe. I knew what people saw when they looked at me. A flustered mom in leggings and a hoodie. Someone who clearly couldn't afford a nanny. Probably unmarried, probably overwhelmed. That's the story society tells about women like me. And it's dead wrong. We were 10 minutes into the air when it happened. A loud, obnoxious ding as the curtain between business and economy opened and he stepped back into our section like a monarch visiting the peasants. "Excuse me," he said, pointing at my row like he was identifying the source of a leak in his yacht. "This woman's child is disturbing the entire plane. I paid over $1,000 for peace and quiet, not to have my eardrums shattered." My son had settled by then, of course he had, but the man was on a roll. "She should be removed or moved," he continued. "I don't care where, but this is unacceptable." "Sir," the flight attendant said, "the baby isn't crying now, and she has every right to be here." He scoffed. "Yeah, until he starts again, which he will. You people always think your kid is the exception. Newsflash, he's not special, he's just loud." I met his eyes then, calm, direct. "He's teething," I said quietly. "It'll pass. Like your tantrum." That got a few snorts from nearby passengers. He did not appreciate the feedback. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. "You think your little sob story gives you the right to ruin my flight?" I tilted my head. "I think empathy costs nothing. You might want to try it sometime." He rolled his eyes and muttered something about welfare moms with attitude before turning back toward his cocoon. But not before adding, "God help us, if there's a medical emergency, half this plane would probably just Google it." He didn't know. He had no idea. And I didn't tell him. Not yet. Not when the sting was still fresh and my heart was still pounding. Let him think he knew me. Let him think he'd won. 45 minutes later, we hit Turbulence. The seatbelt sign chimed on. My son stirred, but didn't cry. Small victories. I was halfway through a lullaby under my breath when it began. The coughing. At first, it sounded like someone clearing their throat. Then harsher, deeper, wet. A different kind of wet. The kind you don't ignore. A commotion in the front cabin. Someone hit the call button. "Is there a doctor on board?" I heard the words as if through water. My hands froze. My breath caught. I waited. Someone would get up. They always do in the movies. A man with silver hair and a leather bag. A woman with a clipboard. But no one did. No one moved. The attendant's voice came again, louder this time, panic creeping in. "We have a passenger in distress. Is there a medical professional on board?" My baby looked up at me with wide eyes. I kissed his forehead, handed him to the woman beside me, and stood. "I'm a doctor," I said. And just like that, the temperature in the cabin changed. Eyes followed me as I moved forward. The same people who'd silently judged my baby were now silently hoping I was competent enough to save a life. The same man who had called me a welfare mom was now gasping for breath, red-faced, gripping the armrest like it was his last link to Earth. I crouched beside him. "Sir," I said, voice calm, measured, clinical. "I'm Dr. Elaine Morris. Tell me what you're feeling." His eyes widened. "You?" he wheezed. "You're the—" "Yes," I said, already checking his pulse. "The inconvenience. The one who ruined your flight. Stay still." He was having a severe allergic reaction. Rapid onset, throat closing, blood pressure crashing. He hadn't eaten anything new, he claimed, but I saw the in-flight snack pack on the tray table. Peanuts. I grabbed an EpiPen from the emergency medical kit, confirmed no contraindications, and administered the injection into his thigh. He jerked, gasped, then coughed violently. Moments passed like years, then his breathing started to even out. Still ragged, but no longer desperate. "You're okay," I told him, not unkindly. "You're lucky." His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I didn't wait for the apology. I turned to the flight attendant. "He needs to be monitored until we land. I'll stay with him." "Thank you, doctor," she said, voice thick with something I couldn't name. Respect, maybe, or relief, maybe both. The businessman didn't speak for the rest of the flight, but he didn't need to. His silence said everything. And me? I went back to my seat, back to my baby, back to the hum of the engines and the weight of 1,000 assumptions lifted off my shoulders like a storm that had finally passed. And the best part? We still had 2 hours left in the air. Plenty of time for him to sit with the discomfort of being saved by the very woman he dismissed. And that, dear viewer, is when I realized sometimes poetic justice doesn't need a courtroom, just a seat assignment. You ever notice how people only see what they want to see? I watched him across the aisle, propped up like a fallen statue trying to pretend it hadn't cracked. The flush was fading from his face, but his hands still trembled slightly, whether from the allergic reaction or the realization that the woman he mocked now held the power to keep him alive. I couldn't say. Maybe both. He wouldn't look at me. Not really. His eyes flicked over, then away, as if holding my gaze might shatter whatever internal story he'd told himself about people like me. Because here's the truth. Men like him don't like being saved by women like me. It threatens the order of things. I wasn't wearing a lab coat. I wasn't carrying a clipboard or a stethoscope. No one expected the doctor to have a diaper bag and spit up on her shoulder. But I didn't need his validation. I had a pulse to monitor, vitals to check, and a post-crisis protocol to initiate. And frankly, I had better things to do than unpack his fragile ego mid-air. Still, part of me wanted him to say something. Not because I needed the apology, but because he needed to give it. For his own damn soul. But men like him, they don't apologize. Not in words, anyway. You have to read it in the shift of their posture, the way they suddenly speak softer to the flight attendants, how their eyes dart towards you like a student scanning a test they once thought was beneath them, and failing. I busied myself with the vitals. Oxygen saturation had stabilized, pulse, strong, breathing, shallow but steady. I rechecked the label on the snack pack. May contain traces of peanuts. Bingo. Didn't know I was allergic, he mumbled finally. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't read the label. I didn't think it mattered. I mean, it was just a snack. A snack almost killed you, I said. He shifted uncomfortably. I travel a lot. Never had a problem before. I nodded, clipped, clinical. Well, now you do. You'll want to get tested for food allergies when we land. Could save your life next time, assuming there is a next time. That shut him up. Good. The captain came on the speaker a few minutes later, voice calm but edged with concern. Ladies and gentlemen, we experienced a medical emergency in the forward cabin. The situation is now under control thanks to the swift response of a fellow passenger, Dr. Morris. We'll be landing in approximately 90 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. There it was, the murmur, like a human wave of whispers. Dr. Morris. The words bounced down the aisle, and suddenly the same faces that had bristled at my crying baby were turning toward me with curiosity, admiration even. The woman 2 rows ahead, who'd rolled her eyes when I boarded, gave me a thumbs up. A man in the aisle seat beside her mouthed, "Well done." The flight attendant brought me a glass of water. Not in a plastic cup, an actual glass. First-class perks trickling backward. Funny how fast the narrative changes when people realize you have value. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I noted it. Every pivot, every recalibration of judgment. He was still staring at his hands when he spoke again. Look, I didn't mean to cause a scene earlier. I tilted my head. Didn't you? His jaw tensed. It was a long week, a big meeting, pressure, noise. I overreacted. I folded my arms. You mean you acted exactly the way you always do, but this time someone saw it. He didn't deny it. Interesting. I leaned in slightly. Do you know what's worse than a baby crying on a plane? He looked up, surprised. I held his gaze. A grown man throwing a tantrum at 30,000 feet. He chuckled, dry, bitter. Yeah, I guess I earned that. No, I said. You earned worse, but I'm not here for revenge. Just medicine. A long pause. Then he said, You're really a doctor? I blinked. No, I just cosplay as one between diaper changes. He smiled despite himself. Fair. What kind? Emergency medicine. Trauma response. 14 years in the ER. 3 of those during a pandemic. I've seen people flatline in grocery stores, on sidewalks, in church pews. You'd be shocked how often death forgets to check your net worth. He swallowed hard. Damn. Yeah, I said. Damn. The silence between us wasn't hostile anymore. It was humbling. For him, mostly. The flight attendant returned with a clipboard. Dr. Morris, we'd like to get a formal statement for our incident report. When you have a moment. I nodded. Of course. She glanced at the businessman. We've notified the ground medical team. Paramedics will meet us on arrival. Thanks, he mumbled. And thank you, she added to me, more earnestly. Most people freeze in a situation like that. You didn't. Freezing wasn't an option, I said, gently taking the clipboard. Not when he was about to stop breathing. I filled out the form while the businessman watched, probably wondering how many other people he'd underestimated in his life. He didn't know that this was my second time saving someone mid-flight. The first was a teenage girl with a seizure on her way to see her dying grandfather. The plane had to make an emergency landing. The gratitude in her mother's eyes had been volcanic. She sent me a Christmas card every year since. I didn't tell him that. Let him wonder. Let the mystery itch at the edges of his privilege. We began our descent, and the cabin lights dimmed. My son was asleep again, one tiny fist curled against his cheek. The woman beside me leaned over. "He's adorable. You handled all this incredibly." I smiled then, small, honest. "Thank you." She looked forward toward first class. "Bet he feels like an idiot now." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some stories write themselves. And the irony? He was probably a venture capitalist. Or a hedge fund guy. Someone who made a living betting on risk. But today his best investment wasn't in stocks or startups. It was in trusting the woman he'd tried to humiliate. Somewhere over Nebraska, maybe, or Iowa. He turned to me again. Not defiant. Not smug. Just human. "You saved my life." I met his eyes. "I know." He hesitated, then added, "And I'm sorry. For what I said. For how I acted." I paused. Let it hang there. Then, apology accepted. Now pay it forward. Next time you see a mom struggling, offer help, not judgment. He nodded, slow, intentional, like maybe, just maybe, it sank in. We touched down to a smooth landing, and as the plane taxied to the gate, the cabin erupted in polite applause. Not for the pilot, for the survival, for the story. The man stayed seated as others disembarked. Paramedics boarded quickly and began checking him over. I stood, gathering my things. My son stirred but didn't cry. I kissed his soft hair, then I turned to leave. But before I stepped into the aisle, the businessman, now pale, humbled, eyes clearer than before, called out softly, "Dr. Morris?" I turned. "Yes. Thank you for everything." I gave a small nod. "Next time," I said, "maybe don't judge the woman in the hoodie. She might be the one holding your life in her hands." Then I walked off that plane like I always do, quietly, efficiently, purposefully. But something told me he'd remember me long after his Uber pulled away from the curb. There's a strange stillness that follows adrenaline, a quiet fog that settles once the crisis is over and your hands are no longer needed. I stood on the jet bridge holding my baby, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of passengers disembarking, and felt invisible again. No more applause, no more dramatic announcements, just another mom stepping into the terminal. But I didn't mind. Not really. Because I hadn't saved him for recognition. I'd done it because that's who I am. Who I've always been. The woman no one expects, but who shows up anyway. As I moved toward baggage claim, I replayed everything. The way he looked down on me. The way he choked on his own pride before he choked on his own breath. And the way, for just a moment, he looked up at me like I was the only person in the world who could save him. Because I was. There's something about that shift, isn't there? When the power flips. When the Goliath realizes the David he mocked came armed not with a stone, but a skill set. With knowledge. With composure. And with zero interest in revenge. Just results. That's the part that gets them. The mercy. It unsettles men like him more than vengeance ever could. At baggage claim, a man approached me, maybe in his 60s, weathered face, corduroy blazer. "Excuse me," he said. "I was on your flight. I saw what you did." I braced myself for either condescension or flirtation, but it was neither. "My daughter's a resident at Mount Sinai," he continued. "Pediatrics. She's the only woman in her group. She says some days it feels like fighting a war with one hand tied behind her back." I nodded. I remember those days. He looked at my son, then back at me. "You gave me hope today, that someone like her might be okay, that she can stand her ground and still change lives." My voice caught. "She'll be more than okay," Isaac said. "She'll change the system, just by surviving it." He smiled, shook my hand, and walked away. No name, just the truth, passed like a torch between strangers who understood. I made it to the taxi line just as the paramedics rolled the businessman out in a wheelchair. He looked smaller now, less powerful, like someone who'd just glimpsed mortality and didn't know how to process the invoice. Our eyes met one last time. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. That, I figured, was enough. The ride home was quiet. My son snored softly in his car seat, cheeks flushed from sleep. The driver made small talk, and I gave polite nods. My mind was somewhere else. Still midair, maybe. Still processing the collision of assumptions and truths that had played out over the Midwest sky. You don't go into medicine for the applause. You go in because something inside you refuses to let people suffer when you could do something about it. You go in because even when the world dismisses you as just a mom, you know the weight you carry in your bones is sacred, life-giving, life-saving. When we got home, I put my son to bed and sat down with a glass of wine, not to celebrate, just to breathe, to come down. I scrolled through my phone and saw the airline had already emailed a formal incident report. Passenger medical emergency resolved by onboard physician, Dr. Elaine Morris. No mention of the peanut, or the arrogance, or the hostility, just the bare facts. Sanitized, convenient, typical. I thought about writing a response, adding detail, context, but I didn't. Let them file their version. Mine would live in the quiet spaces, the glances from other women, the whispered thank you from strangers, the little girl in the ER years from now who might someday say, I want to be like her. Later that night, I got a message request on LinkedIn. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was from him, the businessman. The message was short, 2 sentences. You saved my life. I want to make a donation in your name, any hospital or organization you choose. I stared at the screen, not because I needed his money, but because in those 2 lines, I saw the shift. A man who began the day mocking a woman he didn't respect now wanted to honor her. Progress in inches. I typed back, donate to a women's medical scholarship fund and make it recurring. I hit send, and that was it. No emojis, no pleasantries, just the next step. The next morning, I strapped my son into his stroller and walked to the corner cafe. The barista greeted me with her usual grin. Rough flight? She asked, eyeing the bags under my eyes. Not rough, I said, just revealing. She laughed like she thought I was being sarcastic. I wasn't. We mothers, we professionals, we invisible forces, we live in a world that sees us only when it needs us. But that's okay, because we're not doing it for the world's approval. We're doing it because when chaos hits 30,000 feet, or the ER fills up on a Saturday night, or a child gasps for air, we don't flinch. We don't freeze. We step forward. And if some arrogant man has to learn his humanity by choking on a peanut mid-flight, so be it. You might be wondering what happened to him. Did he really change? Did he start treating people differently? Maybe. Maybe not. But that's not the point. The point is, he'll never forget. Not the moment he almost died. Not the woman he mocked. Not the hands that saved him when he least deserved it. That memory will live inside him like a slow-burning lesson, a warning, a second chance. As for me, I'm back in scrubs tomorrow. Double shift, ER chaos, no applause, no headlines, just the work, just the purpose, just the quiet power of knowing that every life I touch, every pulse I stabilize, every breath I protect is a reminder. You can't underestimate the woman in economy, not anymore.